So one more little detail to cover this week before we get into the lab, and that's the topic of hoisting. So let me go ahead and start with an example. I'm going to console.log an undefined function, and then I'm going to create a function called an undefined function, that doesn't do anything. Actually, I'll console.log undefined. Now, lexically speaking, i.e. in terms of the actual text, it looks like this line happens before this line. And so at this point, an undefined function is still undefined and doesn't actually get defined until right here. But that's not what really happens in JavaScript. So let me hit F12 and reload. And actually, did I save? No. Let me save first and then reload. And you'll see that an undefined function actually gets printed correctly, even though this console.log happens before the function definition. And we also saw another example of that back when we were learning about constructors, where we saw something like my class.prototype.some method is equal to a function that does something. Before we saw a function my class some constructor. Now in both cases what JavaScript does is it basically hoists the function definitions effectively to the top of the file. So what it really does is it makes two passes through the file. The first pass, it gathers all the function definitions that use the function, name, parameter list, syntax, executes those first. And then in the second pass, it executes all the other statements. So even though in terms of the code, this is written after these two lines, when JavaScript executes the code, it does these things first, and then these happen. So that's an example of hoisting, and it's just something to keep in mind. Now, notice this though. If I console.log another undefined function, and then I say var another undefined function is equal to some function that console.logs got here. Watch what happens when I load the code now. So you'll see the first function is defined because it uses function, name, parameter list, but the second function isn't defined. And the reason for that is this is just an assignment statement. It's assigning the value of a variable to an anonymous function, which is different from defining a named function. This is the one way in which a named function definition differs from assigning an anonymous function as the value of a variable. But it's kind of an important difference. So if you use this syntax either in a global function or a local function, you can count on it being defined throughout the scope that the function definition appears in. But if you want to be able to change the value that's assigned to a particular variable, that only happens when you actually execute that line of code. So effectively in the second pass. Now JavaScript also does something with variables, something similar. So it does function hoisting for named functions. It also does variable hoisting for variables. So let's take a look at this. So function hoisting, and I'm going to console.log an undefined variable and console.log another undefined variable. And then I'm going to declare another undefined variable is equal to some value. And I'm not going to declare an undefined variable at all. I'm just going to declare another undefined variable. And let's finish off with console.log another undefined variable. So what JavaScript is going to do is when it tries to access the value of an undefined variable, it's going to generate an error. So let's go ahead and see that error, reload. And I have to actually call the function for this to happen, so hoisting. Right, so I got an undefined variable is not defined, reference error at hoisting. Now if I comment out this line of code, let's see what I get now. So I don't get the error. I get undefined instead for the second variable. So when it does this, I get the value undefined. When I did it without having that var statement, for a variable without a var statement, I get an error. For a variable with a var statement, I don't get an error, but I do get the value undefined. So what's really going on here is JavaScript is treating this as two statements. So this is effectively var another undefined variable as one statement, and then an assignment statement and undefined variable equal some value. So this is effectively two statements, one that declares the variable and one that assigns the initial value. Now JavaScript does hoisting, but it hoists just this part, like so. So this is what I effectively end up with. So when it executes this line, the variable is declared but has an undefined value. Then I do the assignment, and then when I log it again, I get the assigned value. So if I hit reload, I should have exactly the same results here. Oh, actually, I think I misspelled something. Var an undefined variable. That should be another undefined variable. That's what I meant. And then this should be another undefined variable as well. There. So now I should get the same thing as I got before. And I do. So function definitions get hoisted to the top, and the function actually has its source code when it gets hoisted. Variable declarations get hoisted to the top of the scope as well, but only the declaration part, not the assignment part that initializes its value.